At issue this Sunday morning, the final stretch. 9 Democratic candidates vying for one office.
My biggest focus is I want somebody to do something about this crime out here.
Which one will emerge as their party's pick to be Philadelphia's 100th mayor?
I think that the campaigns are going to turn the city out.
This morning, local experts and political observers discuss the state of the race and look at where things stand with 2 days to go until primary day.
NBC10 at Issue starts now.
Good morning. I'm Lauren Mayk. Welcome to NBC10 at Issue. The Pennsylvania primary is 2 days away, and the most closely watched race in our area is the race for the Democratic nomination for Philadelphia mayor. Democrats have a 7-to-1 voter registration advantage in Philadelphia, so the winner of the Democratic primary takes that edge into the general election this fall, which is why there is such a focus on the primary. We haven't seen a lot of polling in this race, but according to an independent public poll in the race conducted by the Committee of 70, 5 candidates have separated themselves from the pack. Rebecca Reinhart served as city controller, and before that, she worked for former Mayor Michael Nutter, first as city treasurer, then as his budget director. She's been endorsed by Nutter as well as former Mayor John Street and Ed Rendell. Sherelle Parker previously served as majority leader in city council. Parker also served 10 years as a state representative representing Northwest Philadelphia and has the support of multiple elected officials and unions, including the building trades. Helen Gim is also a former city council member. She's also a former school teacher, and she has the backing of nationally known progressive leaders like Bernie Sanders and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Alan Dom has a mix of business and political experience. He's a former city council member. He's also a Center City real estate developer and backed by the Greater Association of Realtors. Jeff Brown, he's hoping his business experience will appeal to voters. He founded a 12-store supermarket chain. He has multiple union endorsements and the backing of the Fraternal Order of Police. Joining us now to help analyze the state of the race is a panel of local political observers and experts. Pat Loeb covers City Hall for our news partners, KYW News Radio. Dave Galuch is a Republican former candidate for U.S. Congress in Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District, which covers a part of South Philadelphia. Donna Cooper is executive director of Children First, a nonprofit that's part of the Kids campaign, urging the candidates to focus on issues affecting young people. And Mustafa Rashid is a Democratic political consultant not working for any of the mayoral campaigns. He's president and CEO of Bellevue Strategies. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining me today.
And thanks for having us.
We appreciate it.
So we saw that Committee of 70 poll, which really showed us just a cluster of candidates all bunched together at the top. Since then, Pat, have you seen anything that tells you that anyone has broken out from the pack?
I have heard about the results of some internal private polls. So, how reliable they are is not clear, but definitely the number of undecideds is shrinking. The gap between the top 3 women and the 2 men is growing. In other words, the women have risen to the top. They're still very close together. According to these polls, maybe about 4% between the leader and the 3rd place woman, but then a gap to Alan Dom and then a larger gap to Jeff Brown.
Yeah, getting those undecideds obviously key in the final days. What might be making the difference? What are candidates doing that might be making the difference at this point? Donna?
Well, I think obviously airtime is the biggest impact on people and where they're spending their money. So candidates that are spending their money on Channel 10 are reaching a certain audience, and candidates who are spending their money on cable or on radio are reaching other candidates. And so I think they're slicing and dicing. Where am I going to find those people? Obviously, people are still getting endorsements. And so another question in this race is how much is the endorsement process in the last week going to make a difference?
Do you expect more endorsements?
I think that there's low-level people. I saw, city council people are beginning. The mayor just said who he voted for, although he called it not an endorsement.
He was, to be fair, he was answering my question.
There you go. But I think that at the end of the day, those things are like little signals. And then the question is, what is the committee? What are the committee people and ward leaders doing? Are they beginning to work people? Wards have endorsed. How much are they getting out the vote for the people that they can support their endorsements? In my ward, where I live, there's a lot of mobilization to get people out to vote.
Dave, you ran for Congress in a district that includes South Philadelphia, so you know some of those voters, and obviously some of them were friendly to a Republican,
yes,
like yourself.
Yes.
What are you hearing from those voters about how they are feeling? Are some of them crossing over to vote in the Democratic primary?
I am hearing about that, and to be clear, so I ran in it was the 26th, 39th pieces of the 26th and 39th, and then all the 40th ward. And I consistently heard from folks that they're worried about crime, they're worried about the quality of life issues, the things that might not always grab the headlines, but the trash not being picked up, a business leaving because of safety issues, right? These are things that really affect folks on the ground who may not be avid consumers of politics, and I think those are the issues sort of driving a lot of the undecided folks to decide who to vote for here in the closing days of the primary.
One of the things that is an interesting dynamic that we're seeing in this primary is some of the city's biggest forces are working against each other. Because of, Donna, as you mentioned, some of the endorsements, union endorsements, and then we've got the progressive wing of the Democratic Party that has been very successful in winning elections. Mustafa, what does that look like when we've got really powerful parts of this city's political world working against each other?
Yeah, it's unusual. We've got unusual alliances. We've got former Mayor John Street and former Mayor Michael Nutter, who have never agreed on anything in their entire lives, have agreed on a candidate in this case. And I think it speaks to the uniqueness of this campaign, as Pat mentioned, with three credible, overqualified women that are running for this race. And so that's historic in and of itself. We've got an electorate that's shrinking in some parts, is growing in other parts, and a city that's vibrant and changing every day. And so I think all of those factors are contributing to these allegiances, these alliances that have not existed before. We've got a Democratic Party that's battling with insurgents in the Working Families Party and other progressive wings of the party. So it's very different. We've got mail-in balloting for a municipal election that's never happened before. And so all these factors we're trying to figure out all what they're going to mean, and I think it may take a while for all this to shake out, and that's for us to take a look at this and say, here's what we can expect moving forward. But I think we're going to spend a lot of time on this race even after it's finished.
I think it's the Philly version of a multi-party system.
That's interesting.
That's fair.
That is an interesting observation.
Yeah.
Well, and in that, you've got, I mentioned that sort of progressive wing, and one of the interesting things we're seeing in the final days is Helen Gim really leaning into that, leaning into having Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez come to Philadelphia. Absolutely. And making that, those are the final images that she is leaving voters with. They've got to have some data that makes them think this is going to work for them.
Well, and I think one of the reasons it's less about whether it's AOC and Bernie Sanders in my mind when I talk to my neighbors and people I talk to. It's more about what are they talking about. So you pointed out that people are really concerned about crime. And people know that it's more complicated than just more cops. Granted, Philly has a very low police count right now. It needs to solve that. But one of the things about Helen bringing in these folks is they're talking about more systemic issues. Wage stagnation, which only recently began to change, but inflation has eclipsed it. Education, resources to make sure that kids have construction things to do. And I think one of the things is that the benefit that Helen has that the other candidates don't have, and I'm not supporting Helen, I'm saying it's just that there's a wing that has a narrative that has more to say than just put more cops on the street. And by bringing them in, yes, it's about progressive politics, but it's also reinforcing the narrative that people are looking for deeper solutions, in my experience.
I think it's, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I also just think, look, from a purely tactical standpoint, in a crowded field, she doesn't have to win a gigantic majority to actually come out on top in the primary.
She has a very strong base that's already voted for
So
her.
if there were only two candidates, I would expect Helen to be much less full-throated in her endorsement of all of the progressive policies, because that may not lead her to a victory in a two-way race, but in a 5- or 6-way race, we've seen with D.A. Krasner in 2021, right? You don't need a high turnout to win this. this election. So I think that that's also part of
Yeah,
it. That it's
absolutely.
tactical on her part.
Yeah,
All right, we're going to put a pin in it right there. We're going to take a quick break. More to discuss with this panel. First, we need to take this quick break, though. And coming up this past week, the current mayor, as we just talked about, he revealed who he's voted for. He told us who he already cast his ballot for. And he also talked about what it's like watching other people fight to be the person who replaces him. We're going to talk about that coming up.
This is NBC10 at Issue.
I wonder, what has it been like for you
It's not
to
fun.
watch this?
I mean, being a second-term mayor in a primary, looking at all the things that everybody says we've done wrong, is kind of, and I tend to internalize things which I really shouldn't do. But it's some of the claims people are making are just like ridiculous. We're going to clean up Kensington Avenue in 100 days. I don't know how that's going to happen.
That was Mayor Jim Kenney this past week reacting to the campaign to replace him. He also revealed that he had already voted, and he voted for Sherelle Parker. We are back again with our panel now. And, we haven't heard a lot of that from him. He sort of poured cold water on other people's plans. And I wonder how the campaign might have been different if he had been interjecting, saying, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that, but he didn't do it.
No, but he also would be saying, I'm trying that, I'm trying that, I'm trying that. If people don't think that he's doing his level best to solve all of these problems that the candidates say they're going to solve, they haven't been paying attention. Rebecca Reinhardt, whenever she's asked about crime, group violence intervention, group violence intervention, group violence intervention. We've had a GVI program for 3 years. There's actually data that shows, indeed, it does work. It is working. So, and he is getting no credit. The candidates are acting like he hasn't done anything about crime. So I think the campaign has been very hard on him unfairly.
Yeah. I would say that in my mind, his greatest failing is not communicating effectively and being a champion for the city. I deployed twice as an officer in the Navy, and there were times when there were really tough days and there were a lot of stress. But if I had gone to my team and said, guys, I can't wait to not be your commander anymore, I need to get home now, that's going to totally deflate the team and impede our ability to continue to make progress. Yet the mayor has famously said that, and he sort of intimated that in the way that he's communicated. This city needs a champion. It needs someone who's enthusiastic and excited to be the mayor and is attacking problems with vigor and communicating that those problems are trying to be solved. I think he's failed in that respect. So I think that for the candidates who have been successful thus far, it's because they are communicating in a different way that the mayor's been communicating.
Right, but the thing is, and I agree with Pat, I agree with you too, if the mayor had been a better communicator for these 8 years, we would have a more substantive mayor's race. People would know more about what worked and what doesn't work, and they'd be able to judge the candidates better, and they might be less undecided.
He's the one who can tell us what works and what doesn't.
He could, and his credibility is, he has a credibility challenge right now, but his whole team could. And he could have been using these 8 years to do that. So we would have a more sophisticated conversation. Lots of the folks that I talked to are undecided. They're like, well, I don't know what to do. I voted for Jim Kenney last time, and that didn't work. How do I know that any of these people are going to be any better? People are looking for certainty, and I think one of the challenges that you point out about his weak communications infrastructure, in spite of his great efforts, is that people do not have confidence in themselves anymore as voters to make good decisions.
Yeah, I think one of the disservices that's done, and one of the things the candidates have been trying to do, is to remind people what a mayor does. And so not only you're trying to do a couple of steps, you're trying to remind people what a mayor does and then why I can do that job. I think Mayor Kenney had bristled at being dragged into this campaign. Alan Dom has tried to drag him in, and he has resisted that.
Aired commercials.
And in commercials, correct. And so I think largely the candidates have tried to say, here's what I would do. And yes, we all know it's easier to campaign than it is to govern, and to say I will do all those things. And I think he Mayor Kennedy purposely decided, I'm going to keep myself out of it and not throw cold water on all these ideas. But then when you caught him in a more candid moment, he's like, some of these things are just not practical solutions. But I do think it is about leadership. And to Dave's point, I served in the Navy, and when my officers came and said, this is what we're going to do, whether we believed in the mission or not, so long as they clearly defined where it was that we were going and literally where the ship was headed, we were on board with it. And I think that breeds confidence and familiarity and other things. And that could have been done better. There's no question about it.
Yeah, so he said that he voted for Sherelle Parker. This was not an endorsement event. I asked him a question. He answered it. But does that tell you anything about the campaign right now, Don?
I think it tells you that a couple things. One, that the political infrastructure has lined up, in the traditional political infrastructure has lined up behind Sherelle. And Jim comes out of that infrastructure. So that's one thing.
She helped him.
She helped him, absolutely. And I think that the second thing it tells you is that I think Jim Kennedy cares deeply about this city, and I think he is looking for somebody who he thinks is going to be able to build the political alliances needed to help this city at the state and at the federal level. I think that's part of the calculation there. And so it wasn't an endorsement event. You got information out of him that was a signal to a lot of people. Now, whether it persuades them, because Jim is not in a position to be persuading people, given his own credibility issues, unfortunately. But it was a surprise to me that that's what he said. And it was a signal, actually, that, having sat in that chair, and I was very close to that chair during the Rendell days, you have a pretty good sense of who's going to be able to tweak the levers of government. And I thought that was very telling.
We have now had multiple mayors weigh in, and they chose 3 different candidates. So we'll see what the voters decide.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Well, still ahead, crunching the numbers. Coming up, I'll talk to the head of a nonpartisan group that commissioned the first independent poll of this race. It showed where the race stands and how things would look if Philadelphia had ranked choice voting. We'll talk about whether that's a real possibility coming up.
This is NBC10 at Issue.
We're back now with what this election could mean for future ones. A poll from the Committee of 70 and other groups showed the race for mayor on the Democratic side pretty much anyone's to win. It showed a statistical tie among the top candidates, but the largest percentage came from voters who were still undecided. And joining us now to talk more about that is Lauren Cristella. She is the interim president and COO of the Committee of 70. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
You also crunched the numbers to show people what ranked choice voting would look like if we had that here in Philadelphia, and where people say, this is my 1, 2, 3 top choices, instead of just saying, I want this person. So what is the feedback that you have gotten since then? Are people interested in it?
Yes, and even that was a survey question we asked in the poll as well. We had over half of respondents say that they were interested in seeing this form of voting come to Philadelphia. Over 60 cities across the country use this in their elections officially. And we thought this was a great way to introduce the conversation, and we've heard a lot of feedback, response, and discussion about whether or not this would be a good thing to bring to Philadelphia.
And that doesn't necessarily mean you would have like a runoff election, but that's an option too.
Yes, there's all different kinds of ways to do this, and a lot of them are better than the current way that we are running our elections, especially when there's low turnout and a high number of candidates, right? So this race could be decided by as few as 2,000 or 3,000 votes. And it's something like ranked choice or approval voting, the runoffs that you've seen in Chicago, other forms might lead to a bigger mandate and more consensus around a candidate.
What would it take to actually implement that here? I know that when Derek Green was in city council, he kind of looked at different ways to do elections here, but what would it really take?
So ranked choice voting would take a change in Harrisburg to the state constitution. Yes, and that's a big undertaking, right? You don't see those reforms come along very often, and it would take a lot of political maneuvering to make that happen. But we're working with some election lawyers to see if it would be possible to have approval voting in Philadelphia, which would be as simple as a Philadelphia charter amendment.
So Harrisburg would say, okay, Philadelphia, you can you can decide on your own, basically?
It wouldn't be Harrisburg's choice. It would be basically the same way that we elect our at-large candidates, right? That our charter allows for voting for multiple candidates. And instead of picking 5, this would still be used to pick the top one candidate. So the person with the most votes wins. You don't rank them. You just pick all the ones that would be acceptable to you.
Do you think that you would have to get whoever wins this race? Do you think that that person would sign on to this and want to do it, given that they won the other way?
So that was a question we asked in our mayoral forum that the Committee of 70 hosted on May 4th, and it was a mixed bag from respondents. I know Rebecca Reinhart supported ranked choice voting. I believe Alan Dom did as well. Helen Gim supported a change, but not necessarily ranked choice voting, and Sherelle said no.
Interesting. Well, because if they ran for re-election, they would potentially have to live under those rules.
Yes.
All right. Lauren Cristella from the Committee of 70, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And coming up, I'm going to show you another way that NBC10 is helping you learn more about the candidates and their positions. That's ahead after a quick break.
This is NBC10 at Issue.
We're back now with one last note on the mayoral race. With so many candidates, the choice can feel overwhelming, but you can count on NBC10 to help. We have a breakdown of everything you need to know about the mayor's race before the primary. Just head to NBC10.com/battlegroundpolitics. There you can watch my extended, in-depth interviews with the candidates, and you can see where they stand on the issues that matter most to you. And be sure to join us on Tuesday night after the polls close for a full recap of the results. That does it for this edition of NBC10 at Issue. Thanks for joining us, and happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. Have a great day.